Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a few moments. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a few moments. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that will enable you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting jewishinsider.com. It is AJC's honor to be joined today by Mr. Natan Sharansky. Widely regarded as one of the most notable Jewish figures of the past century, Natan Sharansky's name was a rallying cry for the Soviet Jewry movement. Jailed for his human rights activism and efforts to immigrate to Israel, he spent 9 indescribably difficult years in the Soviet Gulag. He was released in 1986 and went on to serve as a minister in several Israeli governments, as Deputy Prime Minister of Israel, and most recently as chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel. He is the only living non-American to have received both the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal. He was honored by AJC in 1987, 1 year after his release from the Gulag, and in just a few hours after he addressed Freedom Sunday for Soviet Jewry, the historic rally in Washington, D.C., organized by AJC CEO David Harris. Mr. Sharansky is currently chairman for the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, and he will be in conversation with Avi Meir, AJC Managing Director of Global Communications. After we hear from Mr. Sharansky and Avi, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or use the Q&A chat feature in Zoom. Avi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Belle. Thank you, Natan, for being with us, and thank you to the thousands of people around the world who are tuning in to hear this conversation. Let's jump right into it. Natan, you and I are just a few blocks away from each other here in Jerusalem, but unfortunately we couldn't be together due to the situation. This is, of course, not your first encounter with isolation. You have lived through it yourself under very different circumstances. And there was an announcement just today that you had decided to contribute your earnings from the 2020 Genesis Prize to a variety of different causes related to the fight against the coronavirus here in Israel, in the United States, and around the world. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you made that decision and who the recipients of that prize money will be.
Yeah, well, hello everybody, shalom from Jerusalem. In fact, Avi, I think Corona is not something that isolates us from one another. To the contrary, in the most powerful way, it reminds us how we are all neighbors, how it doesn't matter. In fact, at this moment, it doesn't matter whether you are a few hundred meters from me and the other listeners are thousands and thousands of miles from me. We have the same way of communication. We are connected exactly the same way. So Kadosh Baruch Hu sends us a very strong message that there are enemies that you can defeat only together, and that's the time to overcome many differences. I think one of the good results of it is that Israel finally has, hopefully has, a unity government. I think for me, it was clear, the message of the electorate a year ago was very clear to the political leaders, have a unity government. But, well, we needed a more clear message, and this time message was sent by God about Corona, and now we have unity government. I only hope that this message will be learned all over the world. And that's exactly how we came to the decision about what to do with the Genesis Prize. I received this prize in December, and then I told to the Genesis Prize organization that I'd like that this $1 million, the prize, will be spent for the aims of Zionism and human rights, believing that this connection is not clear enough, or sometimes is argued that there is a lot to do in this sphere. But it was in December, then beginning from February, in fact, our life changed. And now it's clear that we are all in this new struggle against Corona. I'm Israeli Revim Lezer. I know the power of this interdependence and our readiness to mobilize to help to those who are in trouble. And I told the Dancers Prize like months ago that I think we have to change the purpose of spending this money. And because billions of dollars are spent by the governments to fight Corona, 1 million will not make a difference if we will not identify specifically organizations and projects which are directed towards those groups which are have most problems. And that type of activity that even $100,000 can make a difference. And that's how 16 organizations were identified who are dealing with the special needs in Jerusalem, with helping to neighborhoods, to all the neighborhoods, including Haredim and Arabs in the Eastern Jerusalem, and the organizations who are dealing with the problems of foreign workers living in the south of Tel Aviv. In fact, Corona makes everybody equal. It doesn't matter for us whether Corona comes from south of Tel Aviv or north of Tel Aviv. You have to fight it. And programs for disabled, and even one small program for working with those prisoners who were released from prisons because of Corona and now need some programs of working with them while they're at home. So, and though most of the money are spent in Israel, some will be spent through Jewish organizations like Moshe House, Hillel, and others for Jews in need in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Madrid, in Roma, and some money will be spent on research in New York and in Weizmann Institute. Research, of course, connected to Corona.
Kol hakavod. Now, let's take a step back and talk about your earlier years. You've spoken quite a lot about the importance of freedom and identity. And you really came to discover those two things at pretty much the same time. Could you tell us a little bit about your sort of earlier years and then how you came to the realization of how those two things were so important for you and for our people?
Well, it's true that whenever I speak about these two things, desire of people to belong, identity, and desire of people to be free, freedom, I find out that many people see that there is a big contradiction or opposition between freedom, what is desire that nobody will tell me what to do, and identity, which means that you accept that there is a group of people whose collective experience is very important for you and you want to live in accordance with their wish too. But I am absolutely sure that these two deep desires are interconnected and depend on one another. And because I have absolutely unique and lucky experience, in my childhood, I was absolutely deprived of freedom and absolutely deprived of identity. We had no identity, nothing Jewish in my life, except of antisemitism. No Jewish holidays, no knowledge about Jewish holidays, no language, no book, no place to get this book, no synagogue, no bar mitzvah, no brit milah, nothing Jewish. But one thing was, it's antisemitism all over, in the street and state antisemitism. And so the conclusion, what your family teaches you, you are a Jew, is kind of disease that you were born with. And the only medicine against it is that you must be the best in physics or mathematics or chess or music, whatever. That's the way how we Jews survive. And also, you grow and you know there is no freedom. There is, I know exactly when I started my life of loyal Soviet citizen, It was the day when Stalin died, and I'm 5 years old, and my father explained to me that it's a big day for us, for Jews. He was very dangerous for us. It's really a miracle that he died now when we are in big danger. Remember all your life that miracle happened. But don't say it to anybody. Do what everybody does. And I go back to kindergarten, and I'm crying together with all the children about death of Stalin. And I'm singing together with all the children about how grateful we are to Stalin, who gave us this great childhood. And I have no idea who of the children is really crying and who is crying exactly like me, because his father said to him that it's a happy day. So that is a typical life of loyal Soviet citizen, when everything is a lie. All your public life, all what you're saying, what you're doing is all lie. But the truth can be said, kept only for your family. And so can you think maybe to fight against this hypocrisy? No, because there are no values in your life except of physical survival and your professional career. And it was very, in fact, unpleasant life. You were looking for the ways to escape this life of lies, and you didn't have it. And then came 1967, and with the miraculous victory of Israel, with huge humiliation of Soviet leaders. And people around you, you see those who love you and those who hate you. They all look on you and say, how you guys did it. And you understand whether you want or not, but for these people, you're connected to Israel. And that's when I started reading, in fact, from the books which were brought secretly to Soviet Union by Jewish tourists or in some other ways, I started reading about us, from Exodus from Egypt to these days. And suddenly you realize that you have a history that you want to belong to. It's such an interesting, such an exciting history. And here are people, Jews from all over the world, who are coming from different places, but they tell you, oh, my father is from Odessa, your father is from Odessa. We are family, we want to help you. And there is, of course, State of Israel, which wants to help you. So that's how you discover your identity. History, people, the country. And then you find out that then it's desire to be part of this history and of these people is so strong that that gives you strength to stop with this lie, to say publicly what you really think, that you want to live for Israel. It will change your life physically for worse, but you will start enjoying the life of freedom. And from there you understand that it is your identity which gives you strength to fight for freedom, and it's your freedom which makes your life so enjoyable. So that's why I bought two for one price, freedom and identity, and I really value very much this connection. And practically everything what I did and what I wrote after this, it was how to continue strengthening our desire to be one people and our desire to be free people.
Now, Natan, when you were in prison, your jailers, the wardens, kept telling you that the world had abandoned you, that no one remembered about you, that you were totally alone. But you knew that you weren't alone. And in fact, around the world, there were thousands, perhaps millions of people who were rooting for you, fighting for you, really struggling on your behalf. We at AJC played a tremendous role in mobilizing the rally in Washington. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that struggle and whether we today can learn from the Soviet Jewry movement on how to mobilize Jews around the world on the issues and the causes that are important to us.
Yes, one of the bonuses which I got by becoming a free citizen and fighting for my desire to go to Israel was really joining this absolutely unique movement, Soviet Jewry movement, which connected you to all the Jewish world. In those few years between my beginning the activism and until I was arrested, I found myself connected to practically every Jew in the world. I met hundreds and hundreds of tourists who were bringing us literature, who were smuggling our letters. I became a spokesman of our movement, and I was meeting with many journalists and representatives of different Jewish organizations who were coming to collect information and then to mobilize the world. When we were organizing demonstration, our big demonstration was 10 people standing for 5 minutes in the Red Square with the slogans, "Let us go to Israel." Why only 10 people? Because the more people will participate, the more chance that KGB will know in advance, KGB secret police, and then there'll be no demonstration. Why only 5 minutes? Even if KGB doesn't know in advance how long you can stand with such slogans in the center of Moscow, and then you'll be arrested. So what is the pleasure of spending this 5 minutes demonstration? But if it is organized well, that was one of my activities, meaning that KGB doesn't know, but at least one journalist from the West knows and will come to see it. You're arrested, but that evening, BBC, Voice of America, Kol Israel, Radio Liberty will broadcast all over the world that 10 Jews are arrested only for their desire to leave for Israel. And next morning, hundreds of thousands of Jews all over the world start acting and start demonstrating, start pressing on their leaders. Senate passing the laws which link all the interests of Soviet Union with our faith. And we felt standing these 5 minutes of demonstration, not only speaking in the name of Soviet Jews, we felt this support of Jews all over the world. So when I was finally arrested and accused of high treason, and it was explained again and again that I will be sentenced to death if I will not cooperate, meaning saying publicly that they are right and we are wrong, and that all the Jewish world is afraid to mention our names. That is the end of the struggle. And after all, look who is supporting you. They're saying they were only a bunch of students and housewives. I think that KGB really gave great definition to our movement. It were Jewish students and Jewish housewives and Jewish lawyers and Jewish rabbis who for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years continued the struggle of mobilization of all, in fact, of all the world. And that's why we survived. That's why our movement, which in the beginning was a movement of a few thousand Jews, became the most powerful human rights movement in modern history. And that's why Soviet Union fell and 2 million Jews left and more than 1 million came to Israel. Now ask me about whether it can be applied for today. First of all, really, there are some lessons which can be used. It was a very inclusive movement. In fact, there was enough place for those who, like French communists and British aristocrats, for grassroots and for establishment. There was for very religious and very anti-religious, for those who came simply because of their Zionism, and those who came straight from the human rights movement, marching together with Martin Luther King. So there was a place for everybody. There were a lot of competing organizations, which Jewish organizations, couldn't stand one another. But all of them felt that they are fighting for an important cause. And with the time we understood, I definitely as a spokesman, understood that it's good that there are so many organizations which disagree with one another. In fact, all of these organizations were on the end on one list in KGB files called anti-Soviet organizations. And all those hundreds of Jewish tourists whom I met and through whom we were sending our information, they were in the same file of KGB. So it was clear that it is one struggle and one victory for everybody with all our differences kept inside. So to what extent this can be used today? Some of it can be, some of it we first have to overcome unbelievable polarization, which is happening all over the world, but happens also in our Jewish world. When even the topic like antisemitism, which always was uniting us, today there is anti-Semitism on the left and anti-Semitism on the right, and it's very difficult to convince people to fight anti-Semitism in their camp and not in the opposite camp.
That's absolutely true. Now, Natan, you in 1986 crossed the Glinka Bridge, got on a plane, arrived in Israel, and you've been living here ever since. You've spoken quite a bit about how, in your view, Israel is sort of the fusion of those two concepts of freedom and identity. And you've also spoken about the importance of a connection to Israel in the formation of young Jews' identities. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about, first of all, how those two concepts are manifested in the state of Israel, and then also a little bit about the role that Israel should be playing in the lives of Jewish young people around the world.
Well, I think we Jewish people, from the moment we appeared in history as people, are having this challenge, how to keep our identity and our freedom together. When did we become people? When we are called first people in the Bible, when we are in Egypt and when we are living in Egypt, we are turning from the tribe to Paro says this is which is then, and Israeli is leaving Egypt and crossing the Red Sea, and then we are getting Taryag Mitzvot, our Torah. So we became people when we became free. We got our identity and our freedom together. And for thousands of years, we are fighting how to stay Jewish in spite of all those pressures on us and on our communities and on individuals, and how to be free even when you are living under the most totalitarian regimes. And Israel inherited this tradition from Jewish people, and Israel is insisting from the very first day, we are a Jewish democratic state. And of course, there are many debates on this law, that law, whether we are more Jewish or more democratic. But what we really succeed, and we should always see where we succeed. We are part of Middle East, whether we want or not, we are part of Middle East, which is on the map of Freedom House, that is the most black spot in the world, the most filled with the most awful dictatorships in the world, Middle East. And there is a small white spot, I speak about the map of Freedom House, democracy, Israel. So Israel is the island of democracy in totalitarian Middle East. And on the other hand, we are part of the free world, that we insist we are part of the free world. And in free world, in Europe, definitely, they decided to sacrifice their identity for the sake of freedom. And we are saying we are part of the free world, but we are a Jewish state, whether you like it or not. So to be today between the world, which is ready to sacrifice their identity for their freedom, and to be part of the world which is sacrificing their freedom for the sake of their identity, fundamentalist dictatorships. And to insist that we are Jewish democratic state, that's the way how we are linking the world. That's the way how we are insisting that these two beginnings have to go together. And if you want, for me, that is our light to the nations. That is our main message to the world. That the real, meaningful, free life is the life of belonging, the life of freedom, and they have both to go together. Now, you ask about how Israel can or should or is influencing on young Jews of the world. Look, I was among those who was strong supporter of the project called Birthright. There were two crazy millionaires, Charles Bronfman and Michael Steinhardt, who had this crazy idea that every young Jew in the world has to be given the opportunity to go for free to Israel. And they came here, and they were promoting this idea, and I became their lobbyist in the government. And there were many ministers who were saying, are you crazy, that we should spend our money to give them to American Jews in order they can send their kids for free on 10 days trip to Israel? It's anti-Zionism. They have to give us money. And I felt that it is very important that it's like changing paradigm, that Israel is now strong enough to try to help to diaspora Jewry in strengthening their identity. And I'm very happy that there was one minister who understood it, but he happened to be Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And in 1998, there was this historic meeting between Bronfman, Steinhardt, Bibi Netanyahu, and myself, when Bibi signed a letter of support. That's how Birthright started. Today, there is no doubt, everybody knows that that is the most easy way to bring you back to your roots, to at least to give you some kind of injection of your identity by coming to Israel. And I have experience with traveling practically in every Jewish community in the world. I saw the same picture, that under this threat of assimilation and this big wave of threat, oppression, of assimilation, there are only two anchors, two brakes against it, which can slow it down or stop it. It's faith and Zionism. If you're connected to tradition, it helps. If you're connected to Israel, it helps. You have both, it's ideal. If you have one, there is what you can work with. But if you don't have neither this nor this, your grandchildren will not be Jewish. Statistically, of course. Your grandchildren will not be Jewish. It's true for Mexico, it's true for Russia, it's true for the United States of America. That's why Israel, that's what I am saying all the time also to my colleagues and politicians in Israel, Israel has this unique role. We have to give a feeling of home to every Jew in the world. Every Jew in the world should come here and feel that he or she, together with their community, together with their prayers, together with their Jewish way of life, they are welcome here because it's extremely important for them staying Jewish. It's our responsibility.
Now, Natan, you spoke a little bit about your early experiences of anti-Semitism, and of course, you've spoken quite a great deal about anti-Semitism since your time in the Soviet Union, and certainly in recent years. You, in fact, today are the chairman of ISGAP, which is an international institute dedicated to studying and combating anti-Semitism. But you formulated what you referred to as the 3 Ds to distinguish legitimate criticism of Israel from anti-Semitism. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that and perhaps your perspective on some of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing right now surrounding this current crisis and whether that can be combated in an effective way.
Well, in fact, today it sounds almost obvious that there are forms of criticism of Israel which are anti-Semitism. But 20 years ago, when I started dealing with this question as a cabinet minister, dealing with the problem, challenges of anti-Semitism, I found out that even to say publicly, the international stage, that this criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism is like to say such a nonsense. It causes such an indignation. Politically, you say, what? You try to stop us criticizing Israel by using this term anti-Semitism? Of course, we are not anti-Semites. Of course, we are against everything what Nazis and the other enemies of the Jews did. But we want to be able to criticize Israel. And as a result, the best cartoon of the year in Europe was a cartoon in the English newspaper with Ariel Sharon eating Palestinian children and the blood drops from his mouth, or Nobel Prize winner in literature from Spain comes to Israel and then publicly says on press conference, I was in a refugee camp. That's Auschwitz of today. And as a result, Israel can be the only country in the world which is permanent title on the Committee for Human Rights in the United Nations, violation of human rights by Israel through occupation. The only country in the world, just in the time when there are millions killed in Africa, when China is destroying Tibet culture, and when Chechnya is bleeding, and the only question which is on the agenda of Human Rights Committee is Israel. That's what made me to come with my 3D principle. I said, anti-Semites through 1,000 years we were demonizing Jews, we were delegitimizing Jews, and we were applying double standard, which was not applied to any other people. And I, of course, gave many examples. So let's see when today Israel is demonized, like in that cartoon, when Israel is delegitimized, or when they're like the only country that there is a question mark whether it is legitimate that it exists, or when Israel is when there is applied double standard in the United Nations or any other body, which is not applied to any other country in the world. That is the same old anti-Semitism, but applied not to individual Jew, but to collective Jew. And as why I said 3Ds, because I had this image when you're coming to watch 3D film, and if you don't put special 3D spectacles, you will not understand what you see. But the moment you put the 3D spectacles, everything is clear. So I said, when you hear the criticism of Israel, in order to decide whether it is legitimate, it can be very unjust, but it can be still legitimate. Like somebody will say that Israel was treating very unjustly Palestinians in Lebanon, in Sabra and Shatila. I can start arguing, was it Israel, was it not? But the very fact of this statement is not making it anti-Semitism. But when it is said that Israel is a new Auschwitz, or puts Palestinians in Auschwitz, or when Israel is judged by the standards that no other country is judged, that's anti-Semitism. And I'm glad that, though it was in the beginning, it was difficult, but then I found a great ally, Joschka Fischer, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, who was a very left-wing minister, by the way. He was the chairman of the Green Party. And before this, he was somehow associated with Bader Meinhof group. So he was once even arrested for anarchy, almost for terrorism. But then he became very sympathetic to Israel when he saw how international terrorism is treating Israel. And he was very sympathetic to my 3D principles, and he helped me to present it on the International Conference on Antisemitism in Berlin. And then in the American Senate, there were committees which also were interested to hear my presentation. And then it became almost official, used by different Jewish organizations. And finally, when international definition of anti-Semitism was formulated, in fact, through examples, it included all 3Ds. And today we have to fight only that all the countries in the world, there is some countries which already recognized officially this definition of neo-antisemitism, some didn't, but at least we, for ourselves, we have to be very clear. There is a lot of place to criticize Israel as any other country, but there should be a very clear line between this criticism and anti-Semitism. And the fact that today there are strong voices on the left and strong voices on the right who are really permanently, constantly mixing this together, the old and new anti-Semitism, we have to be very clear, those who say that they'll love Jews but hate Israel, and those who say that they love Israel but hate Jews, they are equally our enemies.
Absolutely. Now, my last question before we get to some questions from the audience, I understand that you have completed a new book. It's called Never Alone, and I believe it'll be out in September, and it can be pre-ordered even now. But as you and I discussed previously, you said you were going to call it 999 to reflect 3 different periods of 9 years in your life. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what to expect in this new book.
Yeah, well, first of all the questions that we discussed are discussed in this book in deep details, because that's something that I was dealing all my life. That's a book about comparing my 3 perspectives on Israel diaspora relations. How I saw it from prison, how I saw it from Israeli government, and how I saw it from Jewish agency. And I thought to give it the name 999, but then my publisher said that it's too lightweight, so whatever, not serious. By the way, that's a book which I wrote together with Gil Troy, brilliant author and professor of McGill, who made Aliyah to Israel. And we wrote it together. comparing our experiences and putting my experience, the center, the three perspectives. So now it's called Never Alone, exactly as you asked me about whether when KGB tried to convince me that I am alone, I knew in prison, punishing cell, I felt very strongly my connection with Jewish people. And then, of course, it is much more difficult to feel this connection when you are in the government or when you are in Jewish agency, but still it was helping me to see things in the right proportion. I hope you'll read this book. Yes, it is launched by Public Affairs on the 1st of September, but Amazon already publicizes it and you can pre-order for every member of American Jewish Committee. And I promise those who will pre-order my book, I will sign it.
Well, we're gonna take you up on that. Now I think I'll pass the baton over to Belle for some questions from our global audience.
Okay.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you, Mr. Sharansky. Just want to remind our viewers, you can email your questions to questions@ajc.org or use the Q&A chat function in Zoom. Our first question comes from Jenna in Washington, D.C. You recently shared some insights for how to handle coronavirus quarantine based on your time in Soviet prison. For those who might not have heard, can you share some of your key thoughts and recommendations with us?
I can, but you know, what I found out that you can write books and spend years on writing books, and you can write articles and make many speeches. But with all this, you will reach a smaller audience than with 3-minute clip, which went all over the world. So I cannot be as short as I am in that clip, but I can say it's, in fact, of course, I didn't have any experience of Corona. I think it looks like ridiculous to compare my experience in punishing cell with the experience of people sitting in comfort and zooming to one another. But what I found out that when the plans of the people are destroyed so rudely, when their professional ideas are undermined, when their connection to the family is when they're disconnected, suddenly it can bring to kind of depression or despair at least. And from this point, this experience is similar. And what I was saying was, always remember why you're doing this. That's exactly what I had to remind to myself in prison. Why I'm there. I'm in the middle of the very important struggle. And I am a soldier in the struggle. I have a mission. And it depends on me, the result of this struggle. That's, people should remember why they're sitting at homes fighting Corona. Second, what I was saying, don't build plans or don't build on things which don't depend on you. You don't know when it will finish. So if you'll start planning, okay, in 2 weeks it will finish and I can go finally to my vacation, then you'll be disappointed again and again. I knew that whether I will get out alive doesn't depend on me. But whether I'll remain free person, even being in prison, that depends on me. So build your plans that depend on you. You can decide that in the next week, you'll read a book which you wanted to read. Or in the next month, you'll learn Hebrew finally. Or any other ambitious plan, which fully depends on you. And then you can feel yourself that you are controlling your life. The third very important thing, never stop laughing on the situation and on yourself. There are so many jokes in English, in Hebrew, in Russian, on internet about Corona, about mothers, about parents, about everybody. It's very important. As long as you laugh on yourself, you're free. And that's what I learned in prison when I was deliberately telling anti-Soviet jokes to my jailers and they couldn't laugh. Fourth thing, if I remember, is use your hobbies. My hobby was to play chess in my head, and in prison, in the punishing cell, I finally had the opportunity to play thousands of games in my head, to win all of them and to feel yourself very good. Maybe you love playing music, maybe you love dancing, maybe you love singing. That is the time to enjoy life. And finally, the most important, always remember that you are part of Jewish people. We Jewish people, even being lonely in God-forsaken communities, islands, we always, for 1,000 years, we had our internet, our interconnection of Jewish people. which was very difficult, but which always existed inside you. You felt yourself part of these people. Don't forget, that's the time to feel strengthened by your home, by your family, by your people, by your country. That's briefly my experience.
Thank you. Our next question comes from AJC CEO David Harris, who says, "Hi, Natan, it's David."
Hi, David.
One of the big controversies during the Soviet Jewry movement days was over the question of destination. Should everyone go to Israel or be allowed to go elsewhere? You are a strong Zionist, but you had a very particular view that I hope you will share with the AJC audience.
Yeah, I'll be glad to share, but again, I can say that in the book, which will be published on the 1st of September, that's one of the problems which I go into details. It is a forgotten page of our struggle. We were fighting for our right to go to Israel, but then with the time, more and more Jews discovered that on their way in Vienna, they can change their direction and go to America. And well, some of us, we were very upset that some of our friends only in the last moment, only in the airport told us about changing plans. But Israel authorities were really furious about it. They felt that it's kind of betrayal. They demanded from American Jewish organizations to close highest in Rome, to stop helping to those Jews who on their way to Israel change their mind. And then when American Jewish organizations said, no, we cannot do it. This highest as the organization which helped us to our grandfathers to come to America. Then some of them turned to us, to Jewish activists in Moscow, and said, look, you are so popular, so famous because of us. We helped you, we support you. And really behind the scene, Israel did a great work for all these years. I said, now we ask you, you turn to American Jewry and demand from them to close highest or to stop, that America should stop giving them the status of refugees. And some people did write such a letter. I was among those few who wrote different letter. We wrote that we are Zionists. We want to be in Israel. We are fully connected and devoted to this project, to be in Israel. But we do believe that it's not the function of the state of Israel to close any doors for Jews. That Israel has to do everything to attract more and more Jews, but it should not influence of freedom of choice of everyone. What we were afraid of, that some Jews in the Soviet Union will start thinking about Israel as kind of, that Soviet Union tries to limit our freedom of choice, and now Israel tries to limit our freedom of choice. So that was my first serious confrontation with some of Israeli officials. But I have to say, even when I came back after many years in prison, I was released. It was still a very painful issue in Israel when that 30, 50, 70, 80% of those who applied for Israel and then were changing their path. And I was asked that during my first trip to America by Israeli Prime Minister and Foreign Minister to speak on this topic with American authorities and to try to close the gates. And I said, no, I cannot. I want everybody to come to Israel. I cannot do it. And then Moshe Arens, very wise minister, told me, Natan, I understand you. I'm from America. I believe in human rights. But don't you feel responsibility for the future of Jewish people? You know, if you're fighting that they will stay Jewish, those who came to Israel will stay Jewish. Those who came to America will be assimilated. And I have to say, well, it didn't change my mind, my feeling that freedom of choice is as sacred as my Zionist feelings. But his argument, unfortunately, is a serious argument, because when you look at statistics of the assimilation in America, of course, those who came to Israel, their future as part of Jewish family is much more guaranteed. So whenever I'm speaking to Russian Jewish audiences, and there are huge Russian Jewish audiences in San Francisco, in Boston, in Cleveland, in Chicago, in Toronto, everywhere, in New York, of course. When I'm speaking to them, I'm telling them the story, I'm telling them what Arens said. And I said, you know, now it's your obligation and my obligation to do everything to prove that you can use your freedom of choice to come to America and stay part of Jewish people. That's a big challenge, but it's very important that we'll meet this challenge.
Thank you. Co-chair of AJC's Belfer
Want to
Institute.
know more about this? Have to read our book.
Excuse me, sorry.
Yeah.
So co-chair of AJC's Belfer Institute, Mario Fleck in Sao Paulo asks, studies show that the Jewish world outside of Israel is dangerously shrinking in many places. What should be the top priority for those concerned with this issue?
Well, that's exactly continues the topic which I just now raised, that believing in freedom of choice, respecting the decision of every Jew to live wherever they want, and at the same time believing that by far the best place for the meaningful free Jewish life is Israel. I'm saying that it is, if it is important for you. No, I know also many people who are complaining that their children are not interested, and they say, is it important for you? They say, frankly speaking, no. So if it is not important for you, nothing can be done. Okay, then let it be like this. But if it is important for you that the next generation of your family will continue this thousands of years past with all those generations who are behind you, who are hoping, praying, dreaming, and stayed part of Jewish journey, if it is important for you. So from the very early age of your children, think how you connect them to their synagogue, to their tradition, to our tradition, to our people. And there is no better way to do it than to connect them to Israel, to give them opportunity to taste this free Jewish society, whereas so many young American Jews with whom I was talking, who were coming on our Masa programs for half a year, and they were saying they had very different views politically or religiously. And they became stronger in their views. If they were left or right or religious or secular, usually after some months in Israel, you're becoming stronger in your views because you found those who have authority and who have the same views as you. But they say, here we feel that we are loved, not for our views, but for being part of the family. So to give them this feeling of the family is something extremely important. It's something relieving, something enlarging, something enriching your life. And the sooner or the more early age you'll give your children this feeling of pride, of interest, of belonging, the more chance is that your great-grandchildren will be also Jewish.
Thank you. We're getting several more questions on anti-Semitism, so I'm going to try to combine a couple.
Okay.
Shrub Kempner, an AJC Board of Governors member in Galveston, Texas, asks, as you know, many countries, particularly in Europe, are now adopting the working definition of anti-Semitism. How would you assess the usefulness of this tool? And Romy in New Mexico says, given your new role, what would you say is the next frontier or the next big project in trying to combat global anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, I don't have any new roles. Well, it's true that I am changing the hats. I had the hat of refusnik, and then I had the head of political prisoner, and then the head of New Immigrants Party, and then the head of minister, in fact, 4 different ministers, and then the head of Jewish Agency, and now the head of this Institute for Fighting Antisemitism. But the role was the same, to try to connect Jewish people and the state of Israel, to build more and more bridges, strengthen our Jewish family. And from this point of view, as I was saying before, my fight against anti-Semitism is a very important part of keeping our people together. I do believe that this international definition formula for defining anti-Semitism, it goes straight from our earlier attempts of 3D definition about which I was speaking before. Why it is important? Because there should be always a lot of freedom to criticize ourselves as people or ourselves as the state. We should never even try to restrict ourselves or anybody else in their right to criticize. You know, we Jews know that if we cannot criticize something, we hate it. In Israel, politicians who will stop criticizing Israel will have no political future. It's in our culture, it's so natural. But just because of this, we have to give clear margin, clear border, when criticism of Israel turns into antisemitism. It's extremely important. That's why the more countries will adopt this definition, the better. And the fact that, in fact, American committees in the Congress, the Senate, and State Department accepted long ago. On the level of president, recently, President Trump was speaking against BDS and explained how he will apply American legislation against boycotting Israel. And for this, he had to use this definition and to mention Jews as a nation. We're both a religious nation. They were such furious voices. I was surprised. What? It was Nazis who were defining us as nation. So it's ridiculous. We have to accept we are a nation and we are a religion. And there is no way to separate it. And there are, of course, people who define themselves, first of all, as a religion, first of all, as nation. There are many Jews who are Jews because of anti-Semitism, and then they let their enemies to define us. But when we are in Israel, coming from 100 different countries with different types of definitions, we have to accept all of them, and at the same time to make very clear borders where criticism of our opponents turns into the hatred. And now you say, what is the new challenge? Well, the new challenge is how to remain one family, how to make sure that those Jews who chose to live in Israel and those Jews who chose to live in diaspora in America for the sake, it's two very different choices. They decide to live in very different conditions. But if they want to stay as part of one family, part of one journey, they have to make a big effort to understand the other and to accept the other with all the differences. There is no way that Israeli government will see pluralism exactly as American Jews, and no way that American Jews will see the situation with Palestinians in the same way as Israelis see it. But to understand one another, to understand the needs of one another, to see how we can make a step supporting one another, it's extremely important. And sometimes it appears to be much more difficult than one would think when he is in punishing cell in the Soviet Union, and when it is so clear that you're connected to everybody. You cannot say whether you're more connected to Labour or to Likud or to Reformed, to Orthodox or to Sephardi or to Ashkenazi. There is no sense in it. All your power in the Soviet prison is from the fact that all the people are behind you. And that's our challenge, how to make this feeling strong, not when you're in a punishing cell, but when you are in Israeli government or when you're the head of Jewish organization in America. It's much more difficult, but it's a very important struggle, which all of us have first to do with ourselves, and then together with all our community as a people.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're rapidly running out of time, so one last combined question, perhaps in honor of Israel's recent birthday and celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut. What would you say is what stands out to you as the single biggest change that you have experienced from when you first arrived in Israel to today? And what do you hope to see in Israel's next 10 years?
Well, look, the most important change in the life of our generation by far is the creation of the State of Israel. Of course, I was born only in 1948 when the State of Israel was created, but I felt the power of this change when I stopped being a loyal citizen and became already being in the Soviet Union, thinking about myself as a citizen of Israel. The fact that we are doing better than anybody, not almost anybody, in fighting Corona, the fact that we have such a strong economy, the fact that in spite of all the anti-Semitic attacks, we know that nothing will undermine, none of our enemies will undermine our future, is because today there is the State of Israel, that changes the life of every Jew in the world. Now, as to when were these moments when I felt most strongly? I could say when a few years after I came to Israel, I participated in Operation Shlomo. I heard that there will be a secret operation. I called to the head of Jewish agency, insisted on my participating in it, and coming to Africa and to see how the Jews really in biblical clothes coming from their villages straight to Israeli airplane, and I'm standing at the gates of this airplane, and 400 people instead of 200 people are entering this airplane, and near us another airplane, and in one night that the state of Israel takes 14,000 Jews from Africa who were disconnected for more than 2,000 years and brings them to Israel. That was such a powerful experience, or physical experience of how the Jewish life changed. And of course, there were many other tragic events like killing of our president, Yitzhak Rabin, and very joyous events in my personal life, when I became a father and then a grandfather, or in our life as a nation, moving from very restricted, small socialist country to startup nation with like success and feeling yourself part of this process. It was very exciting. And as I said, I have this unique experience of going in one day from KGB prison to Kotel, from hell to paradise. And when you are in the heavens, there is only one way. You can only go down. So now for 33 years, I go down and I'm still in paradise. Every day I feel I'm in paradise, and I'm happy to share this feeling with everybody who wants to join us.
Thank you so much, Natan, for spending some time with us this afternoon. We know that you have been looking forward to spending a little bit more time with your daughters and your grandchildren. We hope that you'll have the opportunity as the restrictions are gradually eased. And of course, we're looking forward to reading your book on September the 1st. With that, Belle, I will hand things right back over to you.
Thank you, everybody. And my best regards to David Harris. Okay.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you, Mr. Sharansky, for being with us today, and of course, for all that you have done for the Jewish people in the state of Israel. I also want to thank our audience for joining us today. To support AJC's vital work around the world, please visit ajc.org/donate. To stay up to date on upcoming Advocacy Anywhere programs, please visit ajc.org/advocacyanywhere. Please join us tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern for a program on the United Arab Emirates and the coronavirus, featuring Her Excellency Ambassador Lana Nusseibeh, UAE Permanent Representative to the United Nations. To register for this program, again, please visit ajc.org/advocacyanywhere. Please stay safe and healthy. Goodbye.